Humehume. Humehume c. 1798–1826, known by many different names during his time, such as George Prince Kaumualii, Tamoree or Kumoree by American writers, was a son of the King of Pot of the Hawaiian Islands. He travelled widely, served in the U.S. military, and led a failed rebellion on the island of Kauai. Early life. He was born in the late 1790s with the name Humehume. His father was King Kaumualii, ruler of the islands of Kauai and Neha. His mother was a commoner, of whom not much is known. This might explain an important event that happened when he was a young boy. In January 1804, the American trading ship Hazard arrived at Kauai. Since the landing of Captain James Cook in January 1778, the port of Humehume had been a known stop for European and American ships in the Pacific. King Kaumualii paid Captain James Rowan of the American trading ship Hazard to take his son aboard, ostensibly to get an education in America. A more believable theory is that Kaumualii's queen did not want any competition for the future throne with her own son, who had the better royal pedigree. His father suggested the name George after the Prince of Wales, at the time later George Roman IV of the United Kingdom. World travel. The ship sailed to the Pacific Northwest, then across the Pacific to China, through the Indian Ocean, around Africa, and finally a year and a half later, back to New England. Hazard finally arrived at Providence, Rhode Island on June 30, 1805. King Kaumualii had provided Rowan some compensation to support his son, probably in the form of valuable sandalwood, estimated to be worth $7,000 to $8,000. George travelled with Captain Rowan to Boston and then to Worcester, Massachusetts, where he was put into the house of his teacher Samuel Cotting in 1813, when Rowan's property had run out. Rowan tried to get George an apprenticeship as a joiner, but George was now a restless young man. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps and was assigned to during the War of 1812. Wasp left port in May 1814, and over the next 2 months was involved in several naval battles in the English Channel. In a June 28 battle with he was injured and came ashore in Lorient, France. He returned and was given a medical discharge, but struggled to support himself. On June 21, 1815, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy and sailed to the Mediterranean on fighting in the Second Barbary War. His service record showed the name George Prince. Another Hawaiian, who had also made his way to New England, went by the name Henry Obakaya, also known as Opikahia. Henry heard about George's war record and located him. Henry had embraced Christianity and convinced George and 3 other Hawaiians to help the missionaries. The missionaries thought recruiting the war hero would be good public relations and might have enhanced his war record. By autumn 1816, George was living in the home of Reverend Jedediah Morse and was taken to the Yale commencement exercises of Yale, where he met Yale's president Timothy Dwight. He had learned to read and write English, since several of his letters survive. In particular, he wrote one to his father on October 19, 1816, about his travels and his hope to return. Near the end of 1816, a pamphlet titled A Narrative of 5 Youths from the Sandwich Islands was published to raise funds for the mission board. It included portraits of each of the 5 students drawn by Samuel Fahrenheit. B. Morse, Jedediah's son. The U.S. Navy at this point claimed that George had not been properly discharged, so proposed sending him to West Point Military Academy. The missionaries thought it would be helpful to them if he went, but George did not want to go to West Point. George's letter to his father was published, and when Samuel Cotting read it, he wanted to cash in on a celebrity by claiming he was owed money for the boy's care. George, basking in the attention, wrote a furious letter complaining about Cotting's treatment. Among the insults, if I am worthy of the title of a prince, I am not going to be trodden underfoot by such a dirty scoundrel as you are. On May 1, 1817, the Foreign Mission School at Cornwall, Connecticut opened its first term with George and the other Hawaiians as students. By the next term there were 12 students, including Indians from Bengal and Calcutta, and a Native American Indian. Samuel Ruggles and James Ely were learning to be mission teachers under Principal Edwin Wellsdwight. Henry Opikahi died in February 1818 with the others at his side, but the school expanded under Herman Daggett. George was eager to return to his homeland, but as the promised voyage was delayed, he grew impatient and would sometimes cause trouble at the school. He thought the other students should defer to him, given his royal status, and in fact had to relearn the Hawaiian language that he had not spoken since being a young child. On October 23, 1819, the 4 remaining Hawaiians finally sailed from Boston on the brig Thaddeus, along with the first company of American missionaries from the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. Although the other Hawaiians are recorded as being baptized and assistant missionaries, he was essentially a private passenger. Back in the islands, the ship arrived at Kailukuna on the island of Hawaii on April 4, 1820. He accompanied the singing of Christian hymns and the bass viol for the first Sabbath. When the Thaddeus left for Honolulu, George stayed behind and, after a quick courtship, married Elizabeth Peake Davis, known as Betty Davis, 1802-1860, daughter of Isaac Davis, who had served Kaumualii as a military advisor and married into Hawaiian royalty. After getting passage on another boat to Honolulu, he convinced missionaries Ruggles and Whitney to take him to Kauai on the Thaddeus. George was eager to reunite with his father, and the missionaries were interested in making an outpost on Kauai. The guns of former Russian Fort Elizabeth were fired in a salute as he sailed into the Bay of Waimea on Kauai on May 3, 1820. He stayed below deck until he knew they were not being fired as a warning. His father happily welcomed his son, who explained the missionaries were his friends. Captain Blanchard was thanked with gifts of provisions and a load of sandalwood. On July 24, 1820, a small party of missionaries started a school in Waimea. The joy of the reunion was not to last. The land of his birth had changed while he had been away. He found he no longer fit into either culture. Although he had been calling himself Prince, the kingdom of Kauai had become a vassal state to Kaumualii since 1810, so he was not to inherit any real power. In 1821, King Humehume paid a surprise visit to his father and forced the elder Kaumualii into exile on Honolulu. By this time, George Prince had reverted to using his birth name Humehume, living with a few followers in a small town called Waihao east of the Hanape Valley. Humehume means to tie up, as in wearing the traditional Hawaiian malo, or getting ready for battle. He and his wife Peake had a son who died young 1821 minus 1823, and a daughter in November 1821 named Kamakahai. Kamakahai was given to another chief ace on the island. They had a third child, Hawaiian 1821-1843. Her Hawaiian name was Kauai, which means rebel woman, was given to her by Humehume. His father-in-law Isaac Davis had died drinking poison that was probably intended for his father Kaumualii, so he became afraid that an attempt would be made on his own life. In May 1824, his father died, and soon he made his move. On August 8, 1824, he led his followers in a surprise attack on Fort Elizabeth, now manned by troops of the Kingdom of Hawaii. After entering the fort, his victory shouts did not bring throngs of supporters, but rather roused the defenders. The attack was repelled. Missionary leader Hiram Binghamai and his family were visiting at the time, but escaped injury. Humehume and his troops returned to Waihao and tried to gather more followers. Kalanamoku, an experienced military commander from earlier campaigns of Kaumualii, had just been stationed on Kauai and sent for reinforcements to search for Humehume. On August 18, 1824, Hapili, Kaikali, Alaleta 2BBNUI and Kaikio arrived with an estimated 1,000 troops and joined Kalanamoku, marching to meet the rebels at their camp, who were routed. It was estimated 130 Kauaians died while only one Hawaiian fell. This would be the largest loss of life in a military armed conflict in the Hawaiian Islands until the attack on Pearl Harbor over a century later. Humehume, Betty, and the baby fled on horseback into the rugged mountains above the Hanape Valley. Betty and the child were quickly captured and not harmed. Humehume was pursued for several weeks before he was captured and brought before Kalanamoku, who spared his life. He was taken to exile in Honolulu as his father had been, where he was reunited with his wife and child, but died from influenza less than a year later on May 3, 1826. He was buried in a common unmarked grave, and there is no known memorial to him.